All right, welcome everybody to session 41 of Classic Metal Class. We're resuming after kind of a little hiatus due to like some scheduling things, and then me falling down, breaking my hip, needing surgery. But we're back in the proverbial saddle again. I'm joined here by my friend and colleague Scott Trudy, who's definitely going to help us out with some of the technical aspects, but we also are people who lived through the era that we're going to be talking about. And actually, I'll kind of fess up when it comes to this topic. I think about myself as an 80s metalhead. Some of the misogyny that we're going to talk about or underrating female artists, I think I probably engaged in some of that at the time. And so what we're going to be talking about is women in heavy metal in the 70s and 80s. And we're not going to touch so much on like the 90s onward for two reasons. One is there's just so many women involved in heavy metal from the 90s onward, and the scene gets better. It's less adversarial, less dismissive, less of having to break in. Right now we have, so many great female metal artists, whether it's like an all-women band like Vixen, who we're going to talk about later, who are still going on, but with a different lineup, a much heavier lineup. I would actually say a more talented lineup than the original one. Or, individual musicians, some of whom we're going to talk about here. Doro Pesch is still, out there touring. She just did a collaboration with Udo Dirkschneider, a duet on his revisitation of Balls to the Wall. I think it was Winter Dreams that they did together. Very prototypically German thing to do. So we're not going to talk about that. And we've hit on some of that in the past when we talked about like tribute bands and the fact that there are all these really cool all-female tribute bands that have funny names that are usually plays on words. For you think of any great metal band that's out there. There's the Iron Maidens, the Judas Priestesses, the Hell's Bells for AC/DC. We don't really need to go into that. We're looking instead at, well, how did we get there? Who were the people who kind of opened the doors? And all too often in early heavy metal in the 70s and 80s, there was this tendency that women were treated mainly either as objects. So, they'd figure into songs about this hot lady that I got together with. Even Iron Maiden does that with Revelations. She came to me with a serpent's kiss and the eye of the sun was on her lips. And Iron Maiden doesn't do a hell of a lot of love songs,
Right.
Or, album covers, parodied in Spinal Tap, Smell the Glove, of course, taking it to kind of an extreme. Or, they're viewed as like support. So they're there to be the audience in terms of glam, or they're dancers, or they're groupies, but they're not treated as agents. And it's not like anybody came along and said, hey, we need to rectify this. This is unfair or something like that. Instead, it was women who were like, well, this is bullshit. And I don't think I want to put up with this. And then they didn't. And, thinking back to the 80s, the metal conversations, the metal scenes could be, sometimes from minorly to majorly misogynistic. Sometimes they were very centered around male fantasies, often with guys who didn't know how to relate to women at all, only knew how to hang out with their bros. And so it could be, kind of demeaning to and hostile to women. The alternative, I think, and I'd be interested, to hear your memories about this, Scott, and get your take on it. So there was like that discourse, the guys getting together in the basement, listening to the stereo, all guys, cranking it out to Metallica or Iron Maiden and being like, this is awesome. Maybe we'll crack some beers. No girls allowed, right? And then you had the glam scene, and the glam scene was very different. It seemed to be more inclusive. Like Rat, actually, Andy and I watched a documentary recently where Stephen Percy was like, the big problem with like a lot of these LA strip shows, it's all dudes out in the audience. We wanted to bring women in so we could sell twice as many tickets and albums. And the way that we figured out to do this was to, like, you know, dress differently. We cared about fashion, you know. And so, you know, that was like almost a marketing strategy. And, you know, was it really making things equal? I don't think so. My feeling was that women were encouraged to be hypersexualized, not really encouraged to get into playing, singing, that sort of stuff. There are some exceptions, you know, like we can talk about Lita Ford, or Vixen, right? They're in the glam spectrum, but in a lot of cases they weren't taking that seriously as artists. And so you got two different kinds of essentially misogynistic or biased metal discourses. And of course, like the real metal people, the traditional heavy metal or thrash metal, are like, we're not like those glam, you know, people.
Right.
And they it was misogynistic, and that they'd be like, that's for girls, or, you know, the fact that there's women in the audience tells you that it's no good. So I mean, what was your take on that?
You know, definitely. I nowadays, if I see, I'll go to YouTube to watch some live shows, and I'll pay attention to who has women in the audience. So, and Rat's definitely one of them. Poison. I mean, I remember seeing
Right.
Poison and Cinderella back in the day, and there was a lot of women in the crowd, and I just think that androgynous thing was appealing to everyone. It was, the music was cool to guys, but the image and everything drew the women. You know, and then the big joke with Rush is, I think we had 2 women in the crowd. Wasn't that great? You know, like. But I do remember metal being pretty much a masculine thing when I was in high school.
Yeah.
Kind of like the picture you painted about no girls allowed, and I got some of my dad's beers, and we're gonna listen to Maiden, and I remember all my friends that were girls in high school, they didn't like the music. They didn't like the Scorpions. They didn't like all these bands. And if I played them in the car with them, they'd make me take it off. So it was.
Yeah. So that reminds me of a crazy story that I think I've told to you before. So I had a friend named Marshall, and you know, he would give me rides everywhere, and he had, like, you know, we had these holders for cassettes in the cars back then, and you could tell like what somebody was into by that. And it was all metal stuff except for a Whitney Houston tape. And I was like, what the hell's that doing there? And he's like, well, when chicks get in the car, that's what I play. Because that shows them that I'm sensitive. And it was like a total front on his part. I mean, he did not care at all. He cheated on his girlfriends. He was kind of a bad guy that way. I remember the women that were into metal in high school. There were the ones that hung out with us burnouts, and they either were like the tough chick sort, like, you know, dressing like Joan Jett or Betty from Bitch or stuff like that. Not quite Wendy O. Williams. Yeah, that was not, you know, not in Wisconsin, right? It's too cold to begin with. And although this is where she got in trouble, actually, as we're going to talk about. Or they were the more glammy sort that were into like the bands that it was okay to be into, like you mentioned, Poison and Cinderella and Rat and stuff like that. And then there were the kind of outliers who just didn't tell anybody that they liked metal, and you would have to find this out through actually having conversations, which, you know, unless there was some reason, you wouldn't know, you know.
The T-shirt did it. I think the T-shirt was the icebreaker.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
You know, and that was made fun of on Mad TV a bunch, you know, where you like Led Zeppelin, I like Led Zeppelin, and that would end a fight between the two people, you know, like.
Yeah. Merch played a big role. I guess you could say, right?
I think so.
In helping to show that you like belong to a particular crowd, or, you know, maybe like we would band logos, we would draw them on our notebooks and stuff. So somebody could say, oh, you like Twisted Sister? Yeah.
That was a conversation starter. That's how you found out, or you'd find out at a party, whatever was played, and people would be like, oh, this junk, we don't want to hear this, we want to put this on. Or
Yeah, that's a good point. Or getting in somebody's car, right? What they
getting
would
in
play,
somebody's
what
car,
what
yeah.
station they would listen to.
True. Or like you said, the cassette case. You'd
Yeah.
always take a look through there. And then it was always a happy surprise when you found something that you thought only you listened to in your town.
Yeah.
And can we put this on?
Yeah. Yeah. So, coming back to our main topic, our focus here is going to be on women as agents in the 70s and 80s. And we're going to talk about some of the challenges that they faced. And we're not going to get into hero worship or hagiography or anything. But I think this is probably an episode that's long overdue. Some of the bands and women that we're talking about here, we've touched on, like in terms of scenes, like we talked about Doro Pesch and Warlock when we talked about German metal. But I think this is a good thing to hit on in general, you know. And it's a great thing that it's less of an issue now, or if it is an issue, it's an issue just in like certain sub genres, not like across the entire metal scene, the way it arguably used to be in the past.
Although I do have some firsthand stories from women I know, that even today, if they're on a bill, sometimes they get grabbed and said, okay, girlfriends, go over there.
Oh,
that still goes on, I guess.
yeah.
And but yeah, that's one of the things that's kind of like, are you a groupie? Are you a girlfriend? Or do you belong back here? And I think that's, I mean, I have heard firsthand that that still happens.
Yeah. Be interesting to know, does that vary, like the grabbers? Is that something that's generational, where like it's less likely to be younger people doing it and it's more likely to be people who are kind of holdovers from the era that we're talking about? Or is it still just kind of a general thing?
That's a great question, and I've asked some of these women that are in the bands to maybe join, because they can maybe shed some light on this stuff personally.
Yeah.
So maybe they'll show up and we can get some questions like that answered. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Oh, so Andrew has an interesting question here, and this is something. It's a great segue into like exploring this distinction that we're going to hit on a couple more times. So, do you think the flamboyance of glam metal made the misogyny easier to disguise? I wasn't alive during that time, but perhaps men could adopt the surface language of femininity without surrendering the authority the scene granted them. My question would be, as someone not there, how did glam metal allow male performers to use feminized aesthetics while still preserving the underlying power imbalance between men and women in the scene? So I have some definite thoughts about that, but why don't you start with yours, Scott?
I mean, I think the 80s beyond, it's a great point. The 80s beyond metal, like say Prince, for example, it really had a lot of that androgynous kind of thing. How did glam metal make performers aesthetics still preserve underlying power imbalance between men and women? That's interesting. I'd have to think about it for a second. Maybe you should go first.
Well, I mean, I think that you could dress up in fishnets and puff your hair up real big and put some like makeup on and lipstick and stuff like that, and still be sexist,
Oh yeah.
yelling, show me your boobs or stuff like that, or expecting girls who go backstage to be very accommodating sexually, or things like that, or even just like in terms of sort of more casual stuff, like go get me a beer, that's what you're here for. I think you could get away with that, and Part of it was, I would say that, when you're a rock star or like an aspiring rock star, you can get away with more crap, right?
Well, that's yeah.
People, especially young, impressionable people who want to be on your good side, are going to like do the stuff that you want. And in a society where women get pushed that a lot more than men typically do, they're probably going to get away with it more easily. I mean, think about the guys from Mötley Crüe. So where like Aerosmith could make a song, Dude Looks Like a Lady, about Vince Neil, and Vince Neil could still be, as sexist as he wanted to be,
Yeah,
So
that's a really good point. I think the big point there is the power they have as rock stars, and are they going to abuse that power?
Yeah.
Or it comes down to, well, I mean, we know a lot went down in the 80s. I mean, even the Def Leppard stories, the documentaries about the In the Round tour, and
Yeah.
I think it's I think they probably I think they wanted they had to be good people. I mean, you can't, it's an abuse of power in that sense, because these people, you mentioned they want to be on their good side, but I think it's kind of like, I'll do anything to say I was with this person. I'll do anything to say I hung out with this person or met this person even.
Yeah. Maybe they don't have a good side where you're going, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but you think about some artists who, they may have been gruff, tough guys, but they did seem to be like genuine protectors and promoters. Lemmy is, I think, a prime example.
Yeah.
I think when he's meeting Wendy O. Williams and doing stuff, they're sort of like equals to each other. But when he's like hanging out with the younger women from girls' school and saying, you deserve a place to play because you're good, and I'm not going to like suggest that we like, screw in the back room as like, a trade-off or something like that. I want you on our tour. He's doing something very different than what some of the more skeevy guys are doing,
That's a good point. Yeah, that would be one of the ones that not going to abuse the power. Even dangling the tour up like a carrot.
Oh, yeah.
That I'm sure that's happened more times than anybody can count, but Lemmy's not one of those people.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a huge inducement, right? I mean, it's one thing to be a groupie and you get like, backstage and a t-shirt and stuff like that, and maybe some Polaroids that you can have bragging rights. It's a whole other thing to have the possibility of going on tour and then probably a record contract on that person's, record company, which is what happened with Girls School. They were on Bronze, but it wasn't a quid pro quo, So going back to Andrew's question, does glam make it easier in a way to do that? Right. I would say, yeah. And I mean, this is sort of like the characteristic, I'm a male feminist. You always got to watch those guys who are very about that, not saying that they're all,
no,
but
it gives you an opportunity that the other bands don't have. So, if you're attracting more women to the crowd and they favor your look, for example, and there's more of them that want to be associated with you personally, that's just a recipe for abuse of power.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, they have more, I would say they had way more opportunity.
If you were in glam, because there's more women around.
Right. Yeah.
That makes total sense. Yeah.
And yeah, but that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, Andrew.
So coming back to the topic of like agency, I thought of a couple like divisions of active roles, and we're going to focus mostly on one of them, which is musicians. So we have all women metal groups, and we're going to talk about quite a few of them. And then we have quite a few bands where it's a female singer fronting an otherwise male band and contributing something to it. We even have some where like they were the driving force, like in Hellion. And then we have other interesting, women musicians who make contributions as guitarists or keyboardists or drummers or stuff like that. So we're going to talk a lot about that. But before we get into that, I think another area that's a real standout in the 70s, late 70s and 80s is women managers. And the two that come up the most are, of course, Sharon Osborne. And there we got kind of a tarnished legacy. She did, she represented Ozzy. She represented Ozzy really, really well. The trouble is that she didn't represent the people she lined up with Ozzy equally well. But she was also the manager for Gary Moore, for Motorhead for a while, for Lita Ford, right? So there's a woman helping to manage a woman. And then we got Wendy Dio, who not only managed Dio, but also Rough Cut and Hellion until there was a kind of a breakup there. But some of the other ones, so again, a bit of a tarnished legacy with this one, Gabi Hoffman, who they've since split up. She was, married to one of the band members of Accept, who, they've kind of benefited more from Accept than anybody else has. And so there's some accusations about some unfairness there. But she also was instrumental in getting Dokken, who spent a lot of time in Germany, did some tracks for the Scorpions when Klaus Meine's voice was shot, helping him in the early part of his career. Over here in the States, we got Trudy Hart, who managed Hart, Aerosmith, Joe Perry, Jane's Addiction, Whitesnake, Slash. That's kind of big. Vicki Hamilton, who was the manager for Guns N' Roses. Poison, Faster Pussycat. She was a management consultant for Mötley Crüe and Stryper, so clear glam thing there. Yeah. And then Kim Hawkes, who was also a manager for Motorhead and Hawkwind and Black Sabbath at one point, and even Rush. And when we talk about women being managers, now this is a really active role because you are like cracking heads with all the other a-holes who are trying to make trouble for the band, right? And maybe even other musicians. I think it was it's either Trudy Green or Vicki Hamilton had to tell Madonna to get the hell off of a stage during a sound check at the height of Madonna's career because she was like thinking she was really important. So, I mean, that's real agency, right?
Yes.
Oh, here's an interesting question from Mark. Would you say someone like Sharon Osborne was an example in the 70s of what today would be referred to as a girl boss?
No. I mean,
okay, go ahead.
My problem with Sharon Osborne is just how she I didn't like how she did business. I mean, all the stories that come out with the people that were in Ozzy's band, not getting credit, not getting paid for the songs wrote, I would say that would be something that would be a bad role model.
Okay.
That's just, I know she got stuff done for Ozzy, but I mean, even if it was a guy, it's a bad role model. If somebody does.
Well, that's interesting, right? She's Don Arden's daughter, and Don Arden was one of these hard-nosed, I'm going to break your knees kind of guys, and she manages to get Ozzy like out from under him. But I got to say, I think she kind of replicates some of his bad tendencies,
Yeah. Either way, I just think, girl boss to me has ethics too.
Okay.
Has an ethical side. I mean, get stuff done really strong, but also, isn't involved in bad business.
Yeah.
That's just my take on it though.
I know the word girl boss, at least over here in the States, it's kind of stale. It's outrun its usefulness. I think when it first came out, people are, oh, that's a girl boss. That's a girl boss. That's awesome. I know some women who, when they hear that term, it's like nails on a chalkboard. So Mark says, Mark says, I thought a girl boss was a bad role model, like a vision of successful women, but cut in a masculine figure. Well, that's where it gets quite interesting, is being hard-nosed in business and setting down boundaries and making sure people respect them, is that a masculine trait as opposed to a feminine trait of being accommodating? I think this is where we can say, and this goes all the way back to like Plato's Republic, right? Plato thinks that we have these different, whatever you want to call them, temperaments that favor different parts of our soul. And he says some women make warriors that are just as good as men because that's their disposition. And some men are all about the making money and they're kind of soft and not very intelligent. And, you know, those are the people that are going to be in the craftsman group. And when it comes to the intellectual side, there's no like men are better at that, or this is more masculine. And, you know, women should stick to the household. The Stoics also, in their better moments, have that point of view as well. So, you know, so it's interesting that so Mark expands more like exploiting the patriarchy for their benefit. Sort of, and you could do this in two ways. You could be like, I'm just going to be like the guys, the corrupt guys who do bad stuff, and I'll just be like them. Or you could be like, I'll be I'm not what we often call a pick me girl. I'm not like the other girls. You know, I'm like one of the guys. You can trust me. And then they exploit that. And it's usually at the expense of other women. In Sharon's case, I mean, she's not exploiting other women. She's exploiting guys like Bob Daisley and Don Harry. And who else did Jakey Lee? You know, she's screwing them over. She's not like let me see if I can, screw Lita Ford over or something like that. Right. And so Mark says exploiting weak men. I don't think
any of them were weak, but
yeah.
she was in a position of power. And you know, the stories of like bringing Jakey Lee out in the middle of nowhere and saying, you have to sign this, you have to sign your rights away, or you get on a plane and wait in line to sue me with other people. That's just awful.
Yeah.
Man or woman, it's just kind of, she was a person that used her power for bad in a lot of those cases.
She could say, I'm like protecting Ozzy, and she was. I mean, if it's quite clear, given how much trouble Ozzy got himself in with alcohol and drugs.
Yeah.
Hey, if they weren't married and she wasn't cracking the whip on him, he would have died. No way. And there's no way he would have put together his solo career without her, because he was not an organizer. I mean, she was the organizer.
Yeah.
But the fact that she did good for one person doesn't translate it into good for everybody else, you know.
In fact, one person and not a lot of other people. Just everybody in the camp. I mean, to have those stories, I just think she would be a bad role model for how to do business, whether it's a woman or a man.
The other agency thing too is being a role model. And so some of these women that we're going to talk about, whether managers or musicians, are providing role models. And one that gets mentioned early quite a bit. It's not really a heavy metal band, but it's Coven, formed in Chicago in '67. They toured with some heavy bands like Alice Cooper and Vanilla Fudge, and they had heavy music with satanic and occult lyrics. And so it's Jinx Dawson. And I read some interviews with her, and she wanted the music to be heavier than the producers were comfortable with. So it could have turned into like proto heavy metal, but I don't think quite makes it. Their first album is it's pretty metal titled Witchcraft Destroys Minds and Reaps Souls. And she gets mentioned by quite a few early heavy metal women as kind of an inspiration to them, a sign that you can do it. It's possible to do that sort of thing. And I think that's important,
Yeah.
Which it might be part of why, we talked about like, we're not in the same boat from the 90s onward. It's because there were all these women who did stuff and broke through. Andrew says, I would say entering a masculine environment doesn't make behavior masculine. Women managers demonstrated the authority the scene claimed for men was never inherently male. Yeah, I think that's quite true. And we can say that for musicians too. Like, think about the idea of like somebody getting up there, playing guitar, standing out in front, shredding.
Yep.
If that's like, we talk about the guitar hero, why not guitar heroine? It depends on who the guitarist is. Lita Ford wasn't that,
Right.
but some of the other people that we're going to talk about, Kim McAuliffe, the lead guitarist that, we went through in girls' school. I would just say some of the female bassists that we see playing, they're doing that, right? And so, Andrew says, couldn't we say it was never simply tested until figures like Wendy Dio or Gloria Cavalera stepped in? Yeah, I think that's a lot of it is when we have stereotypes of like, and this can go for almost anything, this kind of job is done by this kind of person, and we only see that kind of person doing that job. I
Right.
suppose it kind of naturally occurs to us, well, those are associated together somehow, but they're often not, and historically. So just to take a, way off in the weeds example, we tend to think of computer science and tech stuff as being primarily male these days. The early computer scientists, when it was really taking off, a lot of them are women. And at one time, there were more women here in the United States studying computer science than there were men. And that shifted radically, so that by the time that I'm, in college, it's mostly guys, and it's mostly nerds, Um,
Yeah.
and so it's not even like all guys; it's mostly nerds.
Right.
It's a certain type, but historically, these things can change quite a bit. Brewing, Middle Ages, mostly done by women, became a masculine thing down the line as well. But let's talk about some of the bands and key developments. So I thought we could begin in the 70s with two bands that aren't really heavy metal, but we've used this term metal adjacent, meaning like, you'd hear them if you're listening to metal and you're probably liking some of their songs. So one is Heart. They form in Seattle in 73. We got two sisters, Ann Wilson on lead vocals, Nancy Wilson on rhythm guitar and vocals. They're fronting the band. They write all the lyrics. They write most of the arrangements. They're the ones on the cover of Dreamboat Annie. Crazy on You, Magic Man, Barracuda, not metal as such, but pretty metal. They've been covered by a lot of metal bands. I
Yeah.
think that they're important. And then, of course, we have the Runaways. There's debates. Are they really metal or not? I'm willing to say that they're, great hard rock.
Yes.
And we see some of the sexism coming in. The early bassist, who's later going to join the Bangles, Mickey Steele, gets fired, according to her, for not giving into the sexual advances of Kim Fowley, who's the person putting the band together. She also called Cherry Bomb stupid, which I don't think that's the case.
I don't either.
Yeah, it's a good song.
I love it.
But this is like a springboard, right? Because we have Joan Jett on rhythm, so occasionally lead. We have Lita Ford on lead guitar, both of them occasionally singing. Sherry Curie on vocals, a drummer who's there the whole time. Eventually, like a lot of bands in the 70s, they're drinking, they're doing drugs, things break up, they've got musical directions, and they're broken up. And then I really think the most important band early on is Girl School. Actually, I got my Girl School shirt right here.
Cool.
And they were different. I mean, they weren't put together by some guy who wanted to put together an all-girl band. They're formed in 75, and it's Kim McAuliffe on rhythm guitar and vocals, Enid Wilson on bass and vocals. They're in Painted Lady, and there's a couple like shifts and changes that are going to happen in lineup. Painted Lady breaks up in 78, and they're working day jobs, but then they recruit Kelly Johnson, and Kelly Johnson is a guitar hero, especially on those early tracks. And drummer Denise Dufort, they changed their name to Girls School. They start touring, and the stories about why they didn't have any idea. They weren't like, hey, let's make an all girl band or something like that. They just couldn't get guys to play with them, and they had like older cousins and brothers who actually played music, and they're like, oh yeah, girls don't do that kind of stuff. And so they were like, well, screw you, we are gonna do this.
We're gonna do this. Yeah.
I actually read a really interesting interview, and I can't remember where it was. I tried looking for it, where I think it was Kim McAuliffe who was asked, do you consider yourself feminist? Were you like doing this to be feminist? And she imagine like a stare, her giving like the interviewer just a stare and a pause and being like, we don't give a shit about any of that stuff. We just wanted to play good rock and roll, and the guys wouldn't let us do it. So we said, screw them, we're going to do it. And I talked about this at one point with Andy, and I was like, to me, that seems more feminist than the usual run of the mill feminist stuff where it's very programmatic. You just do the damn thing. And Andy was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
I agree with that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially, we don't care about any of that stuff. It's not labeled, it's by action.
Oh, now that I remember. So it came up in the interview because Girls School was also known for, and this kind of goes to Mark's and Andrew's points here. They were known for sleeping with male groupies. So they were imitating some of the sort of bad behavior or rock and roll behavior that male groups were doing. And I think if I remember right, their justification was, well, why the hell shouldn't we? Who says that only the guys get to have fun?
Yeah. I mean, it comes with that, position of, kind of power, and people want to be associated with you. And I mean, the Go-Go's were notorious. I know they're not metal.
Right. Yeah.
But
yeah.
the Go-Go's were notorious as acting the most metal.
Yeah. Yeah. That or rock and roll, right?
Rock and roll. Yeah.
Yeah. So in 78, so they're going to be really important in the new wave of British heavy metal, but they're getting in it early. Their first single, Take It All Away, gets some radio airplay and some underground circulation, like tape collecting. Lemmy hears them. And it's funny because we think about, oh, Lemmy, big, really important guy. Motorhead wasn't that big then, and Lemmy was, viewed as like a cool guy, but a little bit too prone to the drugs, and nobody knew what the hell they were doing. He got kicked out of Hawkwind. So he's like, you really are good. And he brings his manager to the show, and they watch them play, and he's like, we need them on the Overkill tour. So they tour with them in 1979. They also tour with Budgie, which is kind of a cool thing. And then they start coming out with albums. 1980s, Demolition. That's like we sometimes talk about All Killer, No Filler. Their follow-up, Hit and Run, I would say, is like that. Screaming Blue Murder, 1982. Oh, there's a little bit of filler there, maybe. But notice, like, they're like cranking out the albums. Play Dirty, 1983. Running Wild, 85. Nightmare at Maple Cross, 86. Take a Bite, 88. They are musicians. They are performing. They are making new stuff. They did a team up with Motorhead with the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where they do a cover of Please Don't Touch that you may have heard on Motorhead's The Best of Motorhead. And then they do 2 self covers. I think this is really cool. Motorhead performs their Emergency, and Girls School plays Bomber. So they're swapping stuff back and forth. 1982, they're on a world tour. They play with Iron Maiden. They play with the Scorpions, opening up for them. They have kind of a misstep in 84 with Play Dirty. And this is like a constant theme, I think, right? They're being encouraged to glam up their look, to be more characteristically feminine, to make the songs a little bit softer, a little bit more romantic. People don't like it. The fans are like, this isn't the Girls School we we want. I think that's kind of a losing strategy typically in most cases. If you actually have the like heavy metal ethos, to be told glam it up, be more feminine isn't really going to work. And so, you know, they kind of wander a bit and then they get back to their roots and they're still out there. You know, now they've of course had some lineup changes, um, partly due to death. But they're recording. We reviewed their most recent album a couple years ago, I think it was. So I think they're probably one of the, if we're talking about like women artists who presented role models and showed that it could be done without compromising. And when they did compromise, it screwed things up for them.
Right. And notice, I just
yeah.
want to say, notice there's a difference between doing it as a strategy and doing it as an artistic choice.
Okay. You should elaborate on that.
Yeah. So as a strategy is what happened. It's okay. They're on momentum, but they decide to change something that they're not into, but they think it's going to bring more audience. However, if they were like, if they, you know, started to get into different music and did it wholeheartedly, it might have turned out a little different. I mean, it's tough for any band to change, you know, like to do something new. But I think there's a distinction between this is what I really want. My heart's here, and hey, we have a new strategy. You're going to ditch this, you know, and you're going to adapt this, and we're going to see how it works. And I think,
I mean, Iron Maiden Somewhere in Time is a great example of that, right? It's
right.
not like they were like, hey, let's let Adrian Smith write some more stuff because, you know, the girls love him and we'll sell more to the girls.
Right.
And, you know, the guitar synths, that was kind of bold for them because they'd already like staked out that stand. No synthesizers or ulterior motives on Peace of Mind, right? So 2 albums later, they're doing guitar synths. And it was pretty controversial, you know?
Yeah. And before we get off Girl School, I do want to say they did a collaboration with Alcatraz's current guitarist, Joe Stump. And that was kind of a cool video. It was a cartoon video. And but it was, you know, as Alcatraz did something, you know, essentially with Girl School. And I thought it was a really great tune. It was really cool. It was I had seen the video and I was just they sound great. I mean, the band sounds great. They rock. It's metal. It's, you know, and Joe Stump's on there shredding, and it's But yeah, I just wanted to put that in that they're you know they even collaborate with classic bands.
One of the things I'll say that points out is, so if you've got like Girl School versus we'll just call them generic girl metal band that's kind of soft and poppy and it don't really have the chops.
Right.
If you're going to do a collaboration, the collaboration is only going to be as good as the weakest link of it, right? So, you know, if you got Girl School, you know you can put out great stuff. If you're bringing in, I don't know, we'll call them Oozy Goozy or something like that, and they're just some band that got thrown together, they can barely play their guitars or anything, it's gonna suck, you know?
Yeah.
You're either you're gonna take them out completely out of the mixing, right? They're just gonna stand up there holding their guitars, or it's not gonna fly, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Well, somebody else who I think is also very important, but you know, maybe more extreme than say Girl School would be Wendy O. Williams, who starts out in the Plasmatics. And the Plasmatics was one of those interesting bands. Punk people listen to them, metal people listen to them. There were a lot of debates about where they fit in. And they were very extreme, right? So like here in Milwaukee, she got arrested in 1981 for simulating masturbation with a sledgehammer in front of an audience. She would sometimes come dressed in just a couple pieces of duct tape. And you know, she was a very polarizing figure. She managed, well, she didn't break up Motorhead, but she was part of the catalyst. So after the girls' school thing, which Fast Eddie wasn't cool with. I don't exactly know the story behind it. I should look into it. Maybe Fast Eddie was like, we don't play with women.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
Lemmy does a duet of Stand By Your Man with her, and Lemmy does the same sort of deal. Lemmy does Master Plan by the Plasmatics, and she does No Class. Fast Eddie is like, well, this is bullshit. I'm done. And so after Iron Fist, that's the end of Fast Eddie in Motorhead, and then that's when Brian Robertson is going to come in, who we've talked about before. But Wendy O. Williams, somebody who we've talked about quite a bit in the past, playing a big role, is Gene Simmons. He loved to produce people's stuff. He is the guy pushing for a demo for Van Halen. So
Yeah.
he approaches Wendy O. Williams after they do a tour with Kiss about doing a solo album, and it's just called Wow. And interestingly, now think about the diplomacy required for this. So Simmons is helping to produce it. He also plays uncredited, or actually credited as like a pseudonym. He gets Ace Frehley to play on it. A couple tracks. Paul Stanley, Vinnie Vincent, Eric Carr. And then, she makes a whole bunch of other albums. She rejoins the Plasmatics for arguably the first thrash metal opera, Maggots the Record, in 87. So, she's, if you want a role model of a woman who's like, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to,
Yeah.
and use my sexuality in any way that I want to. And now, is she as good of a singer as some of the other people? Like you put her up against Nancy Wilson, no way, right? Put her up against, some other singers, probably not. But she certainly had stage presence, and she's an interesting figure.
Well, she had a world she invited people into. She had a show. She had a
right.
persona. She had and that's, we've always talked about that being part of metal.
Yeah.
Is the world you invite people into. And part of that is being unrestricted at times. So yeah,
That's right. Yeah. And showing that it's not just, so again, agency,
yeah,
sexual excess, showing desire, admitting it. I mean, you listen to her songs, right? Like Bump and Grind. It's a woman singing about how she is going to have sex with this guy who she's into, and she's being quite graphic about it. It's okay if Whitesnake does that, but it's not okay if Wendy O. Williams does it. Well, why not?
Why not? No,
Yeah.
I actually, I think it's really cool to hear it from the other side.
Too, I think that distinction that you made earlier between this coming out, like being authentic, it's authentically what she wants to do, and then it being pandering. If Wendy O. Williams, if we found out, like in her secret diary, that she was like, I don't like sex at all, I just, I see it as a way to sell records or something like that, I think we would look at that song very differently. Actually, the whole album, basically. It's either I want to have sex or I want to break stuff, Wendy O. Williams. If we found out that this wasn't because she was what we nowadays call sex positive, I think we'd look at it very, very differently,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I mean, you have to, you have to believe the world. You're singing about what you want to sing about. And
that's right. Yeah.
Versus the pandering, as you said.
Yeah. So we'll talk about other let's call them female frontmen, front women.
Front women, yes.
But I wanted to talk first about like all women bands, because there you've got like interesting dynamics going on. And there's quite a few of them out there, and I think that we can draw similar conclusions about like the glam versus traditional / thrash thing by looking at what goes on. So the first one that we've talked about in the past, I think we talked about him when we brought up the new wave of British heavy metal, is Rock Goddess, who's exchanged bandmates sometimes with Girl School later on. Rock Goddess is formed by these two sisters, Jody and Julie Turner, when they're 13 and 9 years old in 1977. So these are kids who are like hearing metal stuff and they're like, this is awesome, right? And they recruit their friend Tracy Lamb on bass, and now you got a power trio. And you can start going to town. Jody is doing vocals and guitar. Julie's doing drums. They have a couple other musicians that come and go. Their dad is their manager. Now that can be really good or that can be really bad. Diamond Head kind of got screwed because they had I think it was one of the guy's mom who was the manager, and she didn't really know what she was doing. This guy owns a music store and rehearsal rooms, and that's pretty important, being able to like rehearse somewhere, record.
Yes.
He's got connections. He gets the band their first gigs. By 1982, they are appearing at the Reading Festival. That's big, right? They have a single out, heavy metal, rock and roll. That tells you exactly what they're up to, right? They're playing heavy metal, rock and roll. And it's, is it like one of the top 10 metal songs ever? No, but it's good, and for like kids who are teenagers, pretty amazing stuff.
That is pretty, yeah.
Yeah. And by 1983, they've got the Rock Goddess album out, and they're a bit restricted because Julie Turner's still a minor, still in high school, so there's like a limit in Britain on how many live shows she could do. There probably would be here too in the States, I'm guessing. And then they produce Hell Hath No Fury, which I think is a great album. I think it's better than their first album in 83. And then 1987, Young and Free. That's a good one. They're still around. They're still producing new albums. I think they're a band that really made it, Another one that's made it, Shoya. We talked about them when we brought up Japanese metal. They're formed in 81. So you can see the early 80s are a pretty important time. Keiko Terada, Miki Nakamura get together. They win Best Female Group at this music contest. They get a record contract with Toshiba, and they just crank out the albums after that. And they tour around Japan, and then build up a nice following there. And then we get like a little taste of what's coming. Madam X. This is a glam metal band that's formed in Detroit, Michigan, by the Petrucci sisters, Maxine and Roxy. They'd previously been in an all-female group that wasn't metal called Pantagruel. Madam X had some male members, and they managed to put out an album, We Reserve the Right. Why are they important? Well, because Roxy Petrucci is the sole original member remaining of Vixen, who we're going to talk about shortly. The guitarist, the current guitarist of which Scott knows, and so we can talk about that. Yeah. But some of the other bands that are kind of important. So a little bit of a detour here, and then we'll talk about more glam. Rosie Vista, German melodic metal band formed in 83. They do some demos and singles. They're formed by this guitarist, not the singer, the guitarist, Anca Gratoy, who left Romania in 1977. And she already had an all-female rock band there, Katana. Her goal is to found an all-female rock band in her new home in Germany. So there we've got somebody who's fronting, who's an actual guitarist. And then we get, all these, glam bands. Jaded Lady formed in LA. That's the place to do your glam, other than New York. Out of a former band called Obsession. They get to tour with Rat and Laz Rocket and Steeler. So this is, solid glam credentials. They never managed to record an album, in part because of instability, but they're part of that scene. And then we get Vixen, right? So I don't know. So Girl School is probably the most important early heavy metal all band. Vixen, pretty successful 80s glam metal band. So it's Roxy Petrucci on drums, who's still in the band. Jan Kahnemund on lead guitar, Janet Gardner on lead vocals and rhythm guitar. So you got a nice 4-piece setup, and then Cher Ross on bass. They put out their first album in '88. I think we all know that song, Edge of a Broken Heart, which is, they still play in concert. And here, so I actually want to take a little detour. So my kid, Kat, and I got to see them at Summerfest just a few years ago. Totally different lineup. The guitarist that Scott, you'll talk about in just a minute, she's part of the lineup. It was a different singer than the current singer, but it's not the original singer. And then this amazing Brazilian bassist who also sings and gets the crowd, really amped up. In between bass notes, she's like putting her hands up. She's pretty extraordinary.
She's great. Yeah.
So when we went to go see Vixen, I was expecting lots of Edge of a Broken Heart kind of thing, which is a good song, but it's soft.
You know who wrote that song?
Who?
Richard Marx.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that accounts for the softness. It's a ballad, right? It's a power ballad.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it, but I was expecting that's what we're gonna see. They were heavy as hell. They really brought the metal edge with them. They played some covers, they played some later songs. I think it's a different band now, but it's one that came out of this core. And Vixen, some of these other glam bands, they got a lot of pressure. You need to doll it up. When you do interviews, don't it's okay to say you like rock and roll and that you're a heavy metal person, but don't don't pretend that you're like Iron Maiden or Metallica or anything like that. That's more for the guys. This is to sell music to the girls and the guys. And, I think that probably held some of these musicians back,
Yeah. Cher was in the band until a few years ago. The original bass player.
Yeah.
But Roxy was, no, I'm thinking of a different drummer. But Roxy's still in the band. But I think the original singer left around the same time Sharon did. So it's pretty much a different band except for Roxy.
Yeah, I would say so. It goes back to that some of those metaphysical questions we had. If you got a band that's only got one original member, is it still the same band?
Right. It's it's the old one about the boat going out to sea, right?
Yeah.
And you replace all the parts.
I think that it kind of depends on who the person is. If it's Whitesnake or Dio, and Coverdale or Dio are the one remaining member, yes, that's still the same band, no matter who you put in around it. Same with Ozzy, right?
Well, exactly.
But if only Steve Harris. So granted, Steve Harris is the only original member of Iron Maiden. Yes, true. But their classic lineup has been around and very stable for millions of years at this point. Imagine there's a terrible plane crash because Bruce Dickinson is riding it and Steve Harris isn't there, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm doing Iron Maiden. We got all these new guys coming in." I wouldn't say it was Iron Maiden.
No. And unfortunately, the guitarist from Vixen passed away years ago. So but Brittany, who's the current guitarist, is that's I've known her from way before she did that. She's been in Vixen, but she's fantastic. She's just a rock star. She just has it all. She's got the whole package. She's just stage presence, great sound, cool guitars, plays great.
Yeah.
And sings great too. She's a fantastic singer.
So this is kind of an index. Do you know how I could tell that, besides the fact that Kat is watching this bassist, the entire time, how I could tell that she was really into them? As soon as the set is over, she's like, "Can we go over to the merch thing and can you get me a Vixen t-shirt?"
That's awesome.
Yeah. We were seeing Queensryche that night too, and she was like,
Oh,
I want to get a Queensryche t-shirt, but can you get me a Vixen t-shirt? Now imagine like back in the 80s, would you or I have worn a Vixen t-shirt? Hell no.
no, no, I wouldn't. I would absolutely now, but I think being in high school, you're right. That's a good point.
Yeah. I would have worn a Warlock t-shirt
Yeah.
or a Doro t-shirt, right? I would have definitely worn a girl school t-shirt because I love Demolition Boys. I heard that on Metal Killers collection, and I thought that was, one of the coolest songs ever. But yeah, I mean, Vixen is, I think, transformed into like a powerhouse.
I liked Vixen in the 80s, but much like I wouldn't wear a Poison shirt, I don't think.
Yeah, or maybe even like a Lita Ford shirt, right? I think
Yeah,
Vixen and
yeah.
Lita Ford, you could kind of put them in the same spectrum of, it's metal, but it's poppy, it's glammy, and maybe some of that was, being pushed in that direction. I think Lita Ford wanted to do that. I don't know that Vixen. I think maybe they could have gone heavier than they did.
At the time, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they definitely hitting it now. I mean,
Oh yeah. Now,
great.
there are some much heavier all women bands in the 1980s. And a lot of these are in the speed or thrash vector, we could say. So you got Misdemeanor, formed in New York City in 1985. They did some speed metal stuff. And it's funny too, because they did some interviews and they're like, yeah, we realized after a while we were doing the speed metal just to show off our chops musically. And so we decided we didn't need to do that anymore by the late 80s when we moved to hard rock. Mean Streak is a thrash metal band formed by two guitarists, Marlena Puzo and Marlena Sands. They tour a lot. They have one album, 1988 Roadkill, which I think is quite good. Another one from New York City, Wench. They're a thrash metal band formed out of an earlier band called Pre-Metal Syndrome. They don't get an album out until 1991, but doing some good stuff. Original Sin, a thrash metal band from Wyoming. They don't manage to remain together long, but they produced an album in 86. And it would have been tough for us to get these albums back then. They weren't circulating around a lot.
Right.
And then there's some like, over on the other side of the pond, we have, Ice Age, a Swedish band. They are able to produce a demo that's 6 tracks, which is kind of long for a demo, rock solid. They move from traditional to thrash metal. We have War Bride in LA playing melodic power metal. The catalyst for it, Lori Lindstrath, is Swedish. She moves back to Sweden, and that's when that band basically ends. And then we get another band that we've talked about in the past before, and I think is quite important for what happens later on, Phantom Blue. They're doing great metal stuff. They're formed in 87. Again, I think this is kind of emblematic. It's not the singer getting a bunch of other women around her. It's 2 guitarists.
Yeah.
Michelle Meldrum, Nicole Couch. They add a vocalist and a drummer and some bassists. They get signed by Shrapnel Records.
Yep.
They're connected with like Paul Gilbert and Marty Friedman and Don Dokken. So Phantom Blue, the album, which you can easily find, that's really good. They have built to perform in the 90s. And the drummer, Linda McDonald, went on to form the Iron Maidens, one of the earliest all-women, I think probably the longest continuity all-woman tribute band that's out there. And we saw the Iron Maidens a couple of years back. And, I think we've talked about this before. So we saw a Guns N' Roses all-female tribute band. Trying to remember what they were called.
Oh, Paradise Kitty.
Paradise Kitty, yeah. And then we saw the Iron Maidens. Paradise Kitty, they did a great job, but it's not that hard to play Guns N' Roses songs. To sing with the range of Bruce Dickinson, to play bass guitar like Steve Harris, to be able to imitate. Okay, Slash is a great guitarist, but Adrian Smith and Dave Murray to play like them, and then to be able to do all the drum stuff, especially on the early stuff that Clive Burr was doing. There's all this jazzy stuff. That's
Yeah.
a whole different level of musicianship,
And they're great. And
Yeah.
I think I've mentioned I have 2 former students who've been in the Iron Maidens.
Ooh.
2 former students of mine.
Yeah.
But I last saw them maybe last fall. One of my students was playing the part of Adrian Smith, and I saw them in Rhode Island. I went over.
Wow.
And they were great. I mean, I think the biggest pressure is probably the bass part.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
a huge pressure because there's such a unique sound and rhythms. That's got to be, that had to be a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of bassists who are really good bassists would not be able to step in. Let's say Iron Maiden, Steve Harris has a stroke, dies tomorrow. They're like, we need a new bassist. Who could do it? I think you would have to go to something like
Yes,
a tribute band and find somebody who does Steve Harris really well.
actually, that's a good point. Yeah, because people have their own thing, and that's true with Steve Harris. I mean, he came out with his own sound, his own way of playing, his own, but his personality too. His stage presence, everything. It's just he's one of a kind.
Doing his
Yeah. We love it.
I want to, before we move on to talking about women fronted bands. So I don't really know. I have a speculation here, and I want to get your take on it. And I'd be interested to see what anyone else says about it. So I mentioned, we got the glammy bands, and that makes sense, right? And then we have the bands where it's like the whole mix gets put together, like Rock Goddess sisters are like, hey, you're doing this, I'm doing this. But then we have the bands, and they tend to be thrash or speed bands, where it's 2 women guitarists, and they are the core of the band who start the band. I don't know exactly how to articulate it, but there's something about that genre, those 2 genres, because speed merges into thrash.
Yeah.
You think about okay, so Metallica didn't start out with 2 guitarists. It was the drummer and the rhythm guitarist, and then they got Dave Mustaine in there. But is there something there? Is there a dynamic that would kind of make more sense? If you're gonna start a thrash band, maybe the core should be 2 guitarists rather than picking out a singer first and then finding some guitarists or something like that.
I don't know. I mean, starting with 2 guitar. I mean, it depends. It's the whole unit. I mean, I guess it's who's doing the writing and can they write, and definitely having a good drummer and bass player is huge, I think.
For both of those
Yes.
genres, the rhythm section is going to be absolutely essential.
Without
And you got to have
that,
a certain level of talent to do. I mean, you got to be able to play fast. You got to be precise, because it's not, just punk, right?
right.
It's speed metal. You got to be able to solo effectively, because solos are important in both of those, right?
In a certain style. I mean, really fast playing. And I always get angry when people accuse it of being tasteless playing, because no, it's genre appropriate. You've got to be able to play it right, with the right intensity, and it's some things are meant to hit you over the head.
Yeah.
Or be too much as you might perceive. They're not trying to play blues.
Yeah.
But there's a certain there's a certain, you hear a thrash solo and you go, that was killer. That was on point.
Yeah.
If it was done right. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Okay. Well, let's talk about women fronted bands, where the it's usually going to be a singer rather than a guitarist or a bassist or somebody like that. And we already talked about Wendy O. Williams with Plasmatics. I think the big three in the 80s that are getting like the most attention would be Lita Ford, Lee Aaron, and Doro Pesch. And both with Lita Ford and Lee Aaron, I think what you got is, so it's called heavy metal. It's arguably within the spectrum of heavy metal, but it's definitely more on the glammy side. Lee Aaron has the whole metal queen thing going on for her. Lita Ford was definitely right in the scene, gets married to Chris Holmes for a while, does a duet with Ozzy and all that. She actually was with Sharon Osborne management, as we pointed out, for a bit. And that's part of, her first two albums are a little bit heavier. And then she develops a more like radio friendly sound with Lita, with Kiss Me Deadly, Close My Eyes Forever.
Right.
To her credit, on her albums, she does all the vocals, all the guitars, the rhythm, and the lead part. When she's playing on stage, obviously, she's got a guitarist with her because you can't do all that all the same time. But I never felt like what we've got here is somebody at the level of Doro Pesch,
Right.
And I kind of feel that way about Lee Aaron. I think now all three of them are very photogenic. But I think, Lee Aaron, in a way, it kind of got in her way. She posed topless for We, and she thinks that actually derailed her career. And this is one of the places where she said, my manager screwed me over by pressuring me into doing that. But she was a big deal, but also, sort of like Lita Ford, it's good. It's fun to listen to, but I'm not going to put it in like the top 20, metal artists of all time or something like that. It's not going to make it into the mixtape,
Right. Okay. Yes. Gotcha. Yeah.
Whereas like Warlock, Doro Pesch is fronting it. She's coming out of a different kind of scene. It's a metal scene in Germany. There's bands that are, so there's Snakebite, this band that has some lineup changes. They bring in some people from other bands. And by 82, they've got like a solid lineup. They're touring around playing. She's singing in front. They have their debut album, Burning the Witches, in 84, then Hellbound. She gets elected best female singer by the readers of Metal Forces. Now, we talked about metal magazines. If it was like Circus voting, we might be like, okay, well, that's probably going to be like Lita Ford,
Right.
or Lee Aaron. Metal Forces, it's a serious metal magazine,
Yeah.
They played at the Metal Hammer Festival in 84 alongside Metallica, Venom, Running Wild, Nazareth. If you're on the stage with those guys, you got to, especially at that era, you got to really have your crap together.
Got to bring it.
So, and then they, another album, True as Steel, in 86, Warlock opens the Monsters of Rock at Donington and Mannheim. That's a huge deal too,
That's a huge deal.
And now they were unfortunately one of those bands who was getting screwed by management in ways that are really egregious. So Doro talked about this in interviews. She says that they sold millions of t-shirts at the time. They were the third biggest selling merchandise band after Metallica and Iron Maiden. And the manager screwed them, took all the proceeds from that. So they wound up firing him, getting an American manager, moving over to the States. And we talked about this before. Gradually the band quits being German. She's the only member left after a couple of years. That's all Americans with her fronting. And they couldn't use the Warlock name because the previous manager had the rights to that. So she started having to tour as Doro. I actually think that was a good thing because now she could like showcase herself as being, she's the main talent,
Yes.
She is the band. So going back, if Whitesnake has Coverdale, it's still Whitesnake. If it's, Warlock eventually becomes Doro. And speaking of role models, a lot of younger singers especially, but not just singers, others are like, yeah, Doral Pesh, she showed us the way to go, you know?
Yeah. No, she's legendary.
Yeah.
Legendary.
And with her stuff and Warlock, that would make it into our mixtapes,
Oh gosh,
right?
yeah.
So, or you could imagine going to see them. So I think they're like the top three, and then we get a lot of other really interesting people. Quite a few of them are, in Europe. We have Crystal Pride, this band that forms in Sweden in the late 70s. Susie Christensen is the singer for that. They have a self-titled debut in 85. Breslau, a German band that sings in German, which, as Klaus might have pointed out, kind of limits your airplay.
Yeah.
Jutta Weinhold sings for them, and they only make one album, Spinner Kampfmaschine. But she forms another band that's called Zed Yago, and they're good. There's 2 albums with them in the late 80s, From Over Yonder and Pilgrimage, and there she's singing in English, right? So she's learned that lesson. I'm a huge fan. I think that everybody who's in this knows I'm a huge fan of the Belgian band Acid. And Kate de Lombard is the lead singer for that. They started in the 80s, in 1980. They actually had to form their own record company because there wasn't, labels and promotion in Belgium. And they came out with 3 albums that you can find: Acid, Maniac, and Engine Beast, in a series of 4 years. They didn't have enough money to tour around and get the kind of airplay that they would. I think if they were a German band as opposed to Belgian or a British band, they would have been huge. But kind of wrong place, wrong time, you could say, but really good. I love their stuff.
Yeah.
I woke up today with often wake up with a earworm in my head, and today it was Acid Ghost Rider, because I knew we're going to be talking about them, Oh, Andrew points out something kind of interesting. So let's take a little pause on this. If
Yeah.
MTV was circa 1981, wouldn't that increase visual culture for these bands? Yeah, definitely so. I mean, you needed to be photogenic. Look at Grim Reaper, right?
Right.
Great band, unfortunate looking singer, not photogenic, never going to make it on MTV,
They had that one song, and it was they See You in Hell, and
exactly, yeah,
almost unwatchable.
yeah. There were some really bad videos, but if they had guys in them or women who you like to look at, you'd watch it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, right.
Okay, so he says bands like Vixen, MTV would have created bigger attention for bands like Vixen, not as strong for bands in the 70s. The image of the band seems disproportionate to musicianship in the MTV era, reward spectacle and sex appeal. For example, Cher's Turn Back Time. Could we say that 70s bands pushed against exclusion, 80s bands confronted a system that could include them, but often in ways that compromised their work? Yeah. And, like if you were Iron Maiden, you could get away with videos that would like stitch together shots of the band and think about Run to the Hills, like some old Cowboys and Indians movies and stuff like that. Motorhead, they did videos. It's basically just the band playing, except for Killed by Death, which is Lemmy riding on a motorcycle.
Right.
But nobody expects Lemmy to look good,
Lemmy looks like Lemmy. Like that's
yeah.
part of it. It's part of the package.
The best looking guy in Motorhead was clearly Fast Eddie Clark, and he's nothing to write home about. So, but yeah, I think there's and we could talk about, so a great example of this, not a female band, although they've had some women in the band, Whitesnake, right?
Yes, that's
Starts
right.
out as the Whitesnake band, and it's David Coverdale doing a dick joke, he's very clear about that. He said, like, if I was a dark guy, I'd be a Black Snake band, and it's it's kind of a bluesy band, and they got some, he's got like John Lord playing with them. and, you know, some other people, some great musicians. But yeah, in the MTV era, that's when you got the videos with, you know, they're blow their hair is blowing in the wind.
Yeah.
Sort of, they're posing with the guitars, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, with that effect, female musicians, it kind of depends on how much like MTV play you're getting. So if you're Vixen or Lita Ford, yeah, you really have to think about the sex appeal. Your girls' school, maybe not so much, you know, because girls'
Right.
school wasn't really getting on MTV, I would say, you know.
Yeah, I don't remember them on MTV. I don't.
I mean, who else? I mean, Lee Aaron was playing off of the sex appeal stuff,
Yep.
I would say. Doro was just attractive, and photogenic, but didn't have to kind of doll it up. Um, not like the others did, and she got plenty of play.
Yeah.
Some of these bands never made it onto MTV, you know?
Well, you know, it's you know, some of the 70s people that were big didn't transfer over to the MTV era, I guess
Mm,
is the point. You know, like
yeah.
a classic one, you know, Christopher Cross, you
Yeah.
know, he's not metal, but like that's an example of somebody that sold millions of records and then um you know, he wasn't really on MTV,
That's true, yeah.
which is interesting because he had hits in the 80s, but I think if he had a video, he wouldn't be in it.
I think Sailin' Away had him in it, but there we're talking about soft rock, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think just across the board, I think the MTV culture was um I
Yeah.
mean, of course, metal has the innuendos and stuff like the of the time. So, you know, maybe that's part of that would, yeah, if it's soft rock versus the innuendos, it has to be sexy or whatever they're gonna name it. It's
That's
gotta
true, yeah.
look good.
I mean, it's kind of a good transition. So somebody again who didn't really make it onto MTV, but and I only learned about this band from advertisements at the back of like Circus and Hit Parader magazine, where Metal Blade would have like their catalog.
Right.
So the band Bitch with Betsy Weiss fronting it formed in '80 in LA. They played in '81 alongside Dante Fox. They got signed by Metal Blade. They released this EP, Damnation Alley, which I think is great, and then an album, Be My Slave. That's the thing I saw, is her like holding up a whip. So that's definitely like S&M. You know, it's playing to a certain kind of sexualization. Um, they brought out another album, The Bitch Is Back, in '87. Eventually they changed the band name to Betsy, I guess capitalizing on the fact that it's basically her and the guys that play with her. But then they got a bit softer and that did not work. I mean, that's kind of a common theme. Go too soft, lose your fan base. And then
Yeah.
there were a whole bunch of other great front women. Marianne Scafindo, Black Lace, again, early 1980s, New York City metal band, real metal, right? So now we're not talking about glam or pop or anything like that. Lorraine Gill of Taste of Iron, they were formed in Tacoma, Washington. They're a power metal band. They actually bring out an album in '84. Snow White here in the Midwest, in Chicago, speed metal band. Nicole Lee is the lead singer for them. We've got up in Canada, Lynn Renaud of Messiah Force. They're a speed metal band formed in Jonquière, Quebec. They have an album called The Last Day, which is really quite good. Um, you know, so we've got some musicians with real chops.
Mm.
And to, you know, it's one thing to sing lyrics to soft metal stuff, ballads. It's another to be, you know, belting stuff out to thrash or speed metal, right? And to do that night after night. There were some, you know, more um, glammy stuff, right? We have Smash Gladys. They were definitely a glam band. They're from Canada originally, but then they moved to the States. That's Sally Cato, and they were trying to like outdo some of the sleaziness of, like Motley Crue and people like that. That's a high bar to reach, I would say. But, then we've got other really cool projects like, so Sentinel Beast, right? Sentinel Beast is a thrash metal band from Sacramento. So they're from the scene and they're very melodic and technical. They managed to put out an album, Depths of Death. We have Leather Leona and the Rude Girl band, which breaks up, and then she joins Chastain. Now, Chastain is a cool project. Mike Varney, who is the guy in Shrapnel Records, he wants David Chastain to do a solo album, and he's like, okay, so you're going to do the shredding. We need a good singer. We're going to put this together, and they do like 5 albums in a row, and their stuff is pretty good. And then the one that I think is probably the coolest is Hellion, and the reason I think it's cool. So it's a speed metal band formed in LA in '82. It's inspired by Judas Priest, the song Hellion, right? And it's Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn is the one who forms the band. She is the one who writes all the lyrics. She's the one who, and she wasn't originally like into that sort of thing. At first, she's a DJ. So in 1977, she does a midnight to 6 DJ thing in a Los Angeles radio station, and she hosts a show that specializes in fast-paced metal and punk. And I think this would be like an ideal way to like learn about the musical landscape, right? You're getting everybody's records, you're playing them, you're talking about them. It was called Speed Metal Hell. And she would use this later for her own compilation albums that she produces. And then she starts playing keyboards of all things, right? Then she, gets brought into some bands and she starts singing. And so then she decides, hey, we can do a band. And she gets a bunch of guys and she's like, hey, we're going to do this metal band, and it's going to be speed metal. It's not going to be any of this glam stuff. So they were voted number 4 record of the year in Kerrang in 1984. That's some real accolades, right? And it shows that she's not just getting heard in LA, she's getting heard over in Britain. Ronnie James Dio offered to produce them. And then Wendy Dio begins managing them. So they've got some real star power there. Yeah. Eventually, interestingly, there's a coup within the band and they fire her and they replace her with a male singer, and she sues and she gets the ownership of the name. And so they have to change their name to Burn. She gets a bunch of other guys. So Greg Pecca, who was from Dokken originally, Alex Campbell, from Lion, and this guitarist to join the band, and she continues on with it, right? So I think that's really cool. Now, Wendy Dio drops her because she's going with the older version of the band that becomes Burn. But I think this is a really cool story of somebody who's like, hey, I'm going to, sort of like Girl School, I'm going to do what the hell I want to. Nobody's going to stand in the way. And she makes it happen. And when they try to screw her over, she sues them and she gets the name back. I think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's a good story.
The other one I was going to talk about is Black Knight. So this is Canadian epic power metal, kind of cool stuff, doomy a little bit. So Lori Wild, called the Scream Queen, she is the lead singer for that. So what we see is we have a ton of really, solid, not just like, and I'm not going to knock her. I know it maybe sounds like I'm kicking her to the curb, but Lita Ford is not emblematic of women front women in 1980s heavy metal. There's a lot of like really, really solid singers, guitarists out there that are really contributing to their bands, writing great lyrics, doing it just as well as men are without having to doll themselves up or, as Andrew was pointing out, sort of cater to the MTV aesthetic or anything like that. And so there's kind of a legacy, but we have to look. You have to do some groundwork to find some of these bands, I would say.
Yeah. A lot of them I hadn't heard of. They weren't albums that were circulating.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we have access to them now because we have a lot of them available on streaming platforms or on YouTube. If you can't find it on Apple Music or Spotify, somebody's uploaded it on YouTube.
Yes,
may not be the best quality, but
it's there.
Yeah. But I think the landscape that we see now has really been formed by these great singers and band leaders and guitarists, bassists, drummers, keyboardists from all of these bands that we've been talking about. So a lot to bring to light and celebrate, and I think it's kind of a cool thing to commemorate. Some of these bands are still out there playing.
Yep.
Girl School or Rock Goddess ever come to the States, I know I want to see them.
I saw. Out of a lot of those, I saw Doro a couple times.
Yeah,
in Boston.
She can still. I mean, one of the biggest problems is fuel costs. A lot of these bands don't want to like fly over here and bring their whole sets and stuff like that. And you don't have as much reliable income in the States as you do touring Europe.
Right.
So, but Doro's big enough that she can do that.
I was wondering if I can add one in the
Absolutely.
spirit of women in metal. If I could plug something.
Sure.
I just produced a guitarist named Bella Perrone. She was formerly with the band Plush. Okay. So I'll write her name she has a single out now called Mirrors. It's instrumental, like rock metal. Bella Perrone. Oops, I could spell it right. Maybe check it out. I produced it and I co-wrote the song with her. So she's definitely like heavy rock. And Kevin K-Fig, we call him, is the drummer of it from the band Extreme.
Okay.
So she's really excited about it. I'm really excited about it. So, but I just figured it would go with the theme.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so Andrew has a question for you, Scott. You want to read it?
Yeah. Do you change how you occupy the stage depending on the type of authority the singer projects? Yes. The audience, especially male or female authority, affect that adjustment. That's such a great question. As a side musician, and I'm not sure that everybody, this is personally me, there's different degrees of how they want me to act on stage. I'm with this one female singer now that wants me to really come out and rock it up, and wants me to be present. And I always feel weird because it's her project and I don't want to it feels strange to overstep.
Yeah.
So, if it's a singer project, I usually try to support the singer the best I can, but I always try to look good, because I'm representing them also. And, the audience expectation of male or female authority, that's a really interesting, that's something I haven't really considered. I always see it as the star and the support. But I've backed up a lot of women that are very strong front women that make the crowd go berserk. So, I step out when I need to step out. I mean, with my own thing, it's more reserved. It's like a funk fusion kind of trio. But for the rock and the synth pop metal and all that stuff that I do, it's usually a strong female presence that's bringing the crowd. I play with mostly women, I guess. There's been a few guys, but there's a lot of front women in Boston. So I hope that
I
answers.
wonder how much that's changed over time. Like, let's say, we're talking about the 80s and Girl School gets out or Rock Goddess and, guys in the audience, oh, who are these chicks, And then, they have to work harder than a bunch of guys all dressed in black leather, coming out with their guitars to hold that presence. Maybe that's changed now. Maybe there's less of that, you know,
I you know
expectation.
It's interesting because I never thought that way. Like I
Yeah.
was never
Well,
one of those in high school. I don't think either you or I would have been like, oh, who are these girls? Get them off stage. But that does
but
exist.
we knew a lot of guys who would have been
Knew
like
a
that.
lot of guys that
Yeah.
either did it or would do it.
Yeah.
So I guess I can only speak on my experience with that, and I'm more than happy. I mean, I get to see the best show from the best seat in the house, because I'm playing on stage with them. Artists like Casey Desmond, she's amazing, and Debo Ray, who's R&B, but she does she's R&B and soul, but every year she does a metal show or a rock show where we do like Deep Purple,
Oh, wow.
like all this other stuff. She's got this powerhouse voice for this stuff.
Yeah.
And so, it's usually in that show, she's just like, I want you up front with me. I want you on the solos to step forward. I want you to, do your thing. And, but she just brings, both of those artists just have the place going wild just on their own. Great front people. Follow up when you
Oh,
adjust. When you adjust your playing or stage movement to support the singer, what specific qualities in their presence? Phrasing, the way you hold the center of the stage. The clues are kind of sometimes the singer will come like with Debo Ray, I'm behind her, and sometimes she'll come back with me, and that's kind of an indication to say now it's kind of like she's moved from this part and she's kind of telling me to take the center stage. But support the singer. A lot of times I'll come up to the singer, still behind the singer, and if there's like a specific part where I'm mimicking the melody, say, I interact with the singer that way. And that kind of gets a rise out of the crowd a little bit.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, they basically with playing with these singers, I decode their emotions and their tendencies. The first, I guess, Andrew, at the beginning, the first few gigs, I'm kind of feeling it out. Unless they explicitly say something, I'm kind of play it cautious until I know exactly what the motions or movement means to like back me up, like come up and rock out with me, or you're going to take the front of the stage. And that doesn't come with verbal. That comes with kind of motions, I guess. I hope that answers your question. I hope I'm answering it okay.
Yeah.
Physical intensity, phrasing, phrasing. That's a good one, because sometimes if the singer's in the stratosphere is like really singing high, really nailing it, and then they want me to take a solo, you bet I'm going to go from there. Whether rather than if it's like more of a kind of ballad and they're singing kind of sultry or whatever, I might start there. So that's kind of what the intensity of the singer is, where I'm going to start from. I don't want to, unless they specifically say, I want you to bring it down after I get these high notes.
Yeah.
So, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. I think that's makes sense to me. So, well, I mean, this is all that we've got lined up for this. But I think this is both kind of an informative, but also commemorative and celebrative sort of session. I like it because it brings together a lot of threads from other sessions where we've talked about women in heavy metal, but we never actually like did this particular focus. So I think we'll wrap up here. Any last words from you, Scott, on this?
I'm going to say, echo what you said at the beginning. This is a long time coming. So,
Mm,
we've talked about some of these artists before, or some of these performers or musicians, and I think it's really cool how much that we got through today. So how many bands, and how it's more than you would think
yeah.
that has had an effect. And so it's like I said, like you said, it's kind of this big list of look who's made a difference, and these people have made an effect, and these women have overcome from the 70s those kind of attitudes, and they push through going, I just want to do this.
Yeah, I think the like sheer number is important, rather than like Doro, Lee Aaron, Wendy O. Williams, and Lita Ford being the token,
Right.
girls in heavy metal, right? It's like a whole big spectrum, and that leads us to kind of a healthier viewpoint on it today, I would say.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll close on that. Thanks to everybody for joining us.
Yeah, thanks
And
everyone.
we'll try to do this more regularly now that our schedules are a little bit less
Yeah.
crazy. So, all right. See you, everybody.